The envelope held 2 sheets of paper, and in 60 seconds, Gary Cooper would have to choose which one to read. Wait, because the choice he made walking toward that podium had nothing to do with courage or defiance or any of the words people would use afterward. It had everything to do with a hospital room 3 weeks earlier, where a 23-year-old grip asked him a question he couldn't answer. March 1958, the Pantages Theatre, Hollywood Boulevard. 2,000 seats filled with evening gowns and tuxedos, studio executives and sponsors, the machinery of an industry assembled to celebrate itself. The award for Best Actor was moments away, and the outcome was already known to everyone who paid attention to such things. Gary Cooper was going to win. The Last Horizon had earned $42 million, and reviews that used words like masterwork and career-defining. At 56, Cooper had already won twice before. This was expected to be his coronation, a final acknowledgement of a career spent embodying a particular kind of American integrity. The studio had prepared accordingly. The speech arrived that morning in a cream-colored envelope, 3 pages of careful language vetted by publicity, approved by legal, blessed by the head of production himself. It thanked the director by name. It praised the studio's commitment to quality. It mentioned the craft of filmmaking in terms broad enough to offend no one and specific enough to sound genuine. Cooper read it once in his dressing room. Then he set it aside and pulled out a different document, a production report, single-spaced, official studio letterhead, 7 names highlighted in yellow marker, each one followed by a clinical description of injuries sustained on day 47 of principal photography. Notice what day 47 represented, because without it, nothing that follows makes sense. The Last Horizon was an ambitious production, 8 weeks in the Utah canyons, practical effects, a climactic mine shaft collapse that the director insisted be filmed with real falling timbers rather than miniatures or camera tricks. Authenticity, he called it. The audience can tell the difference. The stunt coordinators had planned everything. The engineers had calculated load weights and fall trajectories. The safety team had positioned themselves at strategic points around the set. Every precaution had been taken, every precaution except the one that mattered. On day 47 at 3:42 in the afternoon, a support beam rigged to fall left instead fell forward. It struck a scaffolding platform where 7 crew members were positioned with lights and reflectors. The platform buckled. 4 men fell 20 feet. 2 were struck by equipment tumbling after them. 1, a grip named Daniel Orozco, 23 years old, 3 months married, was pinned beneath a collapsed beam for 9 minutes, while the rescue team worked to free him. The production shut down for 4 hours. Medical helicopters arrived. Insurance adjusters were called. And somewhere in the chaos, someone typed up a report that reduced 9 minutes of screaming to 3 paragraphs of bureaucratic language. Personnel injuries. Incident 47C. 7 names, 7 descriptions, filed and forgotten. Except Gary Cooper didn't forget. Listen to what happened when he visited the hospital, because this is where the speech he was supposed to give stopped being possible. Cooper went alone. No publicist, no studio handler, no photographer to capture the moment for the press kit. Just a man in a plain coat walking through the halls of County General, asking nurses for room numbers. He visited all 7, sat with each one, learned their names, their stories, the details that production reports don't capture. Marcus Webb, the gaffer, had a daughter starting UCLA in the fall. He'd been saving for 3 years. Now his arm was broken in 2 places, and he was worried about the medical bills eating through the college fund. Thomas Hernandez, the rigger, had been sending money to his parents in El Paso since he was 19. 15 years of steady work, never missed a payment. Now his back was fractured, and doctors were saying He might never work at Heights again. And Daniel Orozco, the youngest, the one who'd been pinned, was lying in a bed with his leg in traction and his wife crying quietly in the corner. When Cooper walked in, Orozco tried to sit up, tried to be professional, tried to pretend he wasn't terrified. "Mr. Cooper, I'm sorry, I wasn't expecting—" "Don't apologize." Cooper pulled a chair close to the bed. "And call me Coop, everyone does." They talked for an hour. Orozco told him about his wife, about the baby coming in April, about how this was his first location shoot, and he'd been so proud to be part of it. He told him about the moment the beam came down, how he'd seen it falling and known in the half-second before impact that something had gone terribly wrong. And then he asked the question that Cooper would carry with him to the Pantages Theatre 3 weeks later. "Mr. Cooper, Coop, do you think anyone's going to remember this happened? When the movie comes out and everyone's talking about how great it is, do you think anyone's going to know what it cost?" Cooper didn't have an answer. He sat there in the hospital room, surrounded by the smell of antiseptic and the sound of machines, and he didn't have an answer. "I don't know," he said finally, "but I'll remember. I promise you that." Orozco nodded slowly. "That's something, I guess. That's more than I expected." Remember that promise, because 3 weeks later, standing backstage at the Pantages Theatre with 2 sheets of paper in his pocket, Gary Cooper would decide exactly what it meant. The studio executive found him in his dressing room 2 hours before the ceremony. Howard Marsh was the kind of man who wore his authority lightly. Soft voice, reasonable tone, the ability to deliver threats that sounded like friendly advice. He'd been with Paramount for 20 years, survived 3 regime changes, learned exactly how to handle difficult talent. "Just wanted to check in, Coop. Make sure you're comfortable with the remarks." "I've read them." "Good, good." Marsh settled into a chair, crossed his legs, projected ease. "It's a good speech. Hits all the right notes. The sponsors are going to love it." "I'm sure they will." Something in Cooper's tone made Marsh pause, a flatness that didn't match the occasion. "Is there a problem?" "I've been thinking about adding something, about the men who were hurt on the mine shaft sequence." The ease drained out of Marsh's posture. "That's not a good idea." "Why not?" "Because the incident is still under legal review, because there may be liability implications, because the studio's position—" "What is the studio's position, Howard, on 7 men who got hurt making a picture that's going to win awards tonight?" Marsh was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "The studio's position is that the production was conducted safely and professionally, that the injuries, while regrettable, were within acceptable parameters for a shoot of this scale and complexity, that everyone involved has been fairly compensated, according to standard industry practices." Acceptable parameters. Cooper let the phrase hang in the air. Daniel Orozco is going to limp for the rest of his life. His wife is pregnant. He's 23 years old. Are those acceptable parameters? "Coop, I understand you're upset, but the ceremony isn't the place." "Then where is the place?" Cooper stood up, walked to the window, looked out at the arriving limousines. "Where exactly is the place where we talk about what this industry does to the people who make it run? Because I've been in this business for 30 years, Howard, and I haven't found that place yet." "There are proper channels. We can set up a fund, make sure the men are taken care of. Quietly, without turning a night of celebration into what? An acknowledgement that celebration has costs? That the picture everyone's applauding tonight was bought with Marcus Webb's arm and Thomas Hernandez's back and Daniel Orozco's leg?" Marsh stood. His voice had hardened. "I'm asking you as a friend not to do this. You'll embarrass the studio. You'll upset the sponsors. You'll turn what should be a triumphant moment into a controversy that follows you for the rest of your career." "And if I do it anyway?" Then we'll deal with the consequences. But I want you to understand what those consequences might be." Cooper turned from the window. His face was calm, but something in his eyes had shifted. A decision made, a line crossed. "I understand consequences, Howard. I've been living with them my whole life. What I can't live with is standing up in that room, accepting an award for a picture that hurt 7 men, and pretending it didn't happen." Marsh left without another word. The moment arrived at 9:47 p.m. Cooper stood in the wings, watching the presenter approach the microphone, knowing his name was about to be called. In his left pocket, the studio's speech. In his right pocket, the production report. 60 seconds. A production assistant appeared at his elbow. "Mr. Cooper, Mr. Marsh wanted me to confirm you have the approved remarks." Cooper patted his left pocket. "Right here." The assistant nodded and moved away. 50 seconds. Cooper could see Howard Marsh in the front row, watching the stage with the careful attention of a man who knows something might go wrong. 40 seconds. The presenter was opening the envelope, making a show of reading the card, smiling for the cameras. 30 seconds. Cooper reached into his right pocket, pulled out the production report, unfolded it. 20 seconds. He slipped the report into the cream-colored envelope on top of the studio's speech. 10 seconds. "And the winner is Gary Cooper for The Last Horizon." He walked onto the stage. The applause washed over him like warm water. 2,000 people celebrating a performance they'd loved, a career they admired, a moment they expected to unfold exactly as such moments always unfolded. Cooper reached the podium, accepted the award, looked out at the sea of faces, and opened the envelope. The studio's speech was there. 3 pages of approved language. On top of it, a single sheet covered in names and incident numbers. He pulled out the production report. "Thank you," he said. "This means a great deal." He paused. The audience waited for the usual words. Thanks to the director, praise for the studio, humble acknowledgement of the craft. "I want to read you something that isn't in the program tonight. It's called a production report. Most of you have never seen one. They document what happens on a film set when things go wrong." The room had gone quiet. Not the comfortable quiet of anticipation, something else, something uncertain. On day 47 of The Last Horizon, a support beam collapsed during the mineshaft sequence. 7 crew members were injured. Their names are on this report, but I can promise you they won't be mentioned in any of the reviews, any of the articles, any of the conversations about what a magnificent achievement this picture represents. Cooper looked down at the paper. "So I'm going to mention them now, because if you don't know who they are, you don't really know what you're applauding." He read the first name. Marcus Webb, gaffer, broken arm in 2 places. He has a daughter starting college in September. He read the second. Thomas Hernandez, rigger, fractured vertebrae. He's been supporting his parents for 15 years. Doctors say he may never work at heights again. He read the third. Daniel Orozco, grip, crushed leg, 9 minutes trapped under a beam. He's 23 years old. His wife is expecting their first child in April. 4 more names. 4 more injuries. 4 more lives reduced to incident numbers in a report nobody was supposed to see. When he finished, he looked up. "I visited these men in the hospital. I sat with their families. I heard their stories. And one of them asked me a question I couldn't answer. He asked if anyone would remember what happened once the picture came out and everyone was talking about how great it is." Cooper held up the award. "This is beautiful. I'm honored to receive it. But I want to be clear about what it represents. It represents the work of hundreds of people, most of whom you'll never know. Some of them were hurt doing that work, and the least I can do, the very least, is make sure their names get spoken in a room full of people who have the power to make sure it doesn't happen again. He folded the production report, slipped it back into his pocket. Thank you for listening. I know this wasn't what you expected tonight, but I promised Daniel Orozco that someone would remember, and I keep my promises. He stepped back. From the podium, silence. 2,000 people frozen in their seats, unsure how to respond to something that had never happened before. Then a sound from somewhere in the middle of the room. A single pair of hands clapping, then another, then another. The applause built slowly at first, uncertain, scattered. And then it became something else. A wave that started in the back rows and swept forward until the entire audience was on its feet. The standing ovation lasted nearly 3 minutes. Cooper stood at the podium watching it happen, his expression unreadable. When he finally walked off stage, Howard Marsh was waiting. "You just declared war on the studio." "No." Cooper handed him the empty envelope. "I just kept a promise to a 23-year-old kid in a hospital bed. If that's war, then the studio should think about what it's fighting for." The aftermath unfolded exactly as Marsh had predicted, and nothing like it at the same time. The phones rang all night, sponsors called, demanding explanations. Newspapers called, demanding statements. Other actors called, some offering support, others warning Cooper that he'd made powerful enemies. The studio considered legal action and found nothing actionable. Cooper had read names from an official document. He'd stated facts. He hadn't accused anyone of wrongdoing. He'd simply refused to pretend that a celebration existed in isolation from its costs. But relationships don't recover from public embarrassment. Paramount cooled toward Cooper, and Cooper didn't seem to mind. The easy partnership of 3 decades developed edges that never smoothed out. What Cooper did seem to mind was the photograph that arrived at his home 2 weeks later. No return address. Inside, a single image. 7 men standing outside County General, some still bandaged, one in a wheelchair, all of them looking at the camera with expressions that mixed exhaustion and something else. Something that might have been gratitude. On the back, 7 signatures and a single line. "You remembered. Thank you." Cooper kept that photograph for years, not framed, not displayed, just tucked into his desk where he'd see it every morning. When people asked about it, he'd just shake his head. "Reminders," he'd say. "It's easy to forget what matters when everyone's telling you something else does." Look at what the story actually asks, not whether you would have given the approved speech. That's a question with no risk, asked from the safety of not being there. The real question is smaller and lives closer to wherever you are right now. When you see something true that everyone around you is pretending doesn't exist, what do you do with it? Most people stay quiet. Most people calculate the cost of speaking against the cost of silence and decide that silence is cheaper. Most people give the approved speech. Gary Cooper didn't give the approved speech. He kept a promise instead. And 7 men who expected to disappear into a filing cabinet learned that sometimes, not often, not reliably, but sometimes, someone with a microphone decides that disappearing isn't acceptable. The production report is still in an archive somewhere, probably, filed under Incident 47C, forgotten by everyone who was supposed to care about it. But the names aren't forgotten. They got spoken once in a room full of people who had the power to change things, by a man who decided that a promise to a stranger mattered more than the comfort of a crowd. That's not a Hollywood story. That's an everywhere story, and it's still waiting to be told again. Every time someone with a platform has to choose between the speech they're supposed to give and the truth they actually know. If you enjoyed spending this time here, I'd be grateful if you'd consider subscribing. A simple like also helps more than you'd think. This is a dramatized story inspired by real people and events. Specific dialogue, scenes, and side characters are creative reconstruction for storytelling purposes.